Today we're going to talk about a new push to expand the Supreme Court, including some moves by both Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi, along with a certain nightmare scenario if we don't expand the court. And I interview U.S. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo about the American Jobs Plan, how to push back against China, and how GOP opposition to this bill will hurt Republicans' constituents most. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen, and you're listening to No Lie. So the issue of court expansion is back. Biden made news by creating a commission composed of 36 members to study the issue of expanding the court. At the same time, legislation's been introduced by Jerry Nadler in the House and Ed Markey in the Senate that would increase the number of justices on the court from 9 to 13. So practically speaking, it would mean that since Biden would get to nominate 4 more justices, they'd all be Democrats. So instead of a 6-3 conservative court, it would be a 7-6 liberal court. Now, Nancy Pelosi dumped cold water on the idea, at least in the immediate future, saying, quote, "I have no intention of bringing it to the floor." And instead, she backed Biden's plan to create a commission, and she said, quote, "I don't know that that's a good idea or a bad idea. I think it's an idea that should be considered. It's not out of the question." So look, do I think that Pelosi wants it? Of course. But for all of the criticism that she gets, the last thing that anyone can fault Nancy Pelosi for is failing to go into these fights with the unified caucus. So she's going to make sure that she has the support before doing anything, court expansion included. Which, by the way, she needs that support because we've got a cushion of only a couple seats in the House, so there is no room for error here. But meanwhile, Republicans have suddenly gotten back on their high horses when it comes to the sanctity of the Supreme Court, claiming that Democratic efforts to pack the court are an affront to the very fabric of the judicial branch. But come on, we weren't born yesterday. Democratic calls to pack the court didn't happen in a vacuum. We didn't wake up on Tuesday and say, hey, you know what would be cool? This is the direct response to Republican court packing. And we can argue semantics until the sun goes down, but that's what this is. Republicans didn't let a Democratic president confirm a justice because he was a Democrat. I'm talking about when Obama nominated Merrick Garland, meaning that Republicans changed the number of justices on the bench from 9 to 8 for a year. And then they raised the number back to 9 when they can be assured that a Republican was in office. That was court packing. But then let's just give Republicans the benefit of the doubt, who say that it was fair for McConnell to prevent a president's nominee from getting a hearing in an election year so that the people can decide. Let's just grant them that. Okay? Well, they broke their own rule 4 years later. Forgetting about an election year, they confirmed Amy Coney Barrett while people were voting. The election was occurring, meaning that there are no standards, there are no precedents, there are no rules. It's just whatever Republicans need on that day, at that moment, to benefit them. That's it. So for them to turn around now and pretend like they're out here defending the sanctity of the court, I mean, come on. Democrats calling for court expansion are doing so in response to that. Republicans can pretend that everything that happened before January 20th doesn't exist, but we were there. Democrats aren't the instigators here. We didn't create this problem, but we should have every intention of fixing what was broken. And keep in mind, too, we wouldn't be here if Republicans weren't so brazenly power hungry. Even after the Merrick Garland thing, as bad as it was, if they wanted to make that the rule, then fine. Can't confirm a Supreme Court judge in an election year. But it was when they reversed their own rule that was bullshit to begin with to shoehorn Amy Coney Barrett onto the court. Well, then what choice do we have? Do nothing and just allow them to rig that system? That's what it is now. It's rigged. When you have it so that only one party gets to nominate judges, that is a rigged system. So if Republicans want to clutch their pearls over Democratic efforts to add seats to the court, let's be honest here, they've got themselves to blame. But let's just say the Democrats don't pack the Supreme Court. Brian Beutler from Crooked Media had a great newsletter. He outlined what he called a nightmare scenario. And that is that, okay, Democrats pick their battles, they leave SCOTUS as is, but they do accomplish their top priorities of reforming the filibuster and passing H.R. 1 and a Voting Rights Act. We do what is so desperately needed to shore up our democracy. You know, we accomplish the single biggest and most important mandate of Joe Biden's presidency. And then imagine that the 6-3 conservative court strikes those things down. That is the nightmare scenario. And before you say that that's baseless fear-mongering, consider that Republicans have already said that it's unconstitutional. They've already broadcast their intention to prove that it's exactly that. So you really don't think that the same court that gutted the Voting Rights Act would be willing to take a sledgehammer to H.R. 1? The same court that ruled in Citizens United? I hate to break it to you, but this 6-3 conservative court is not going to be falling over itself to protect democracy reforms to unrig a system rigged by the very same people who filled most of that bench in the first place. And so Beutler argues there are two options here. The first, obviously, is to expand the court. That would be the most direct way to rebalance what has been an anti-democratic packing of the court in the first place. But the other option, at a bare minimum, is to keep alive the threat of court packing. In other words, change the filibuster, pass H.R. 1, and make it abundantly clear that if the Supreme Court wants to go ahead and take an axe to it, that Democrats will have no choice but to reform the bench. That Democrats won't be willing to sit back and watch while these same conservative judges run defense for Republicans as they rig our country's elections for their own benefit. Brian Beutler put it best when he wrote, "If Republican justices seem inclined to rubber stamp a 21st century Jim Crow, they should be admonished in advance that it'll be the last decision the Robert Court ever makes." But whichever route we choose, the point is that we can't just skip over this element of it. We can't overlook the court. The fact is that we need to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. All of these things need to happen. We need to win the filibuster fight so that we can pass H.R. 1. That is the only way we pass H.R. 1, and there's no way around it. Then we need to win the fight to pass H.R. 1 into law. That's the only way to make sure that Democrats don't get legislated out of government, and there's no way around that. Then we need to win the court expansion fight, or at least keep the threat of doing so alive and well. That is the only way to make sure that a conservative court doesn't legislate from the bench and strike down H.R. 1, and there is no way around that. Every single element is going to be a fight, and every single element is non-negotiable. And notice, I'm not even talking about legislative priorities. Like, I could be here talking about how nuking the filibuster would help pass healthcare legislation and women's reproductive rights and climate change legislation, all of which are hugely important and I will fight my ass off for, but I'm not talking about any of those because this isn't about changing the rules to score wins on our agenda items. This is just to level the playing field. This is just to keep democracy going. And it sucks that we have to use our political capital and our energy and our time just trying to make democracy work, which should be a bare minimum in this country. But here we are. Republicans have made it so that if we don't act, we'll be legislated out of government. States will be gerrymandered to within an inch of their lives. Voting will get harder and harder for people in Democratic strongholds. People will get kicked off the rolls. Lines will stretch hours long. Whatever they can do, they're doing. And so we don't even have the luxury of just fighting for legislative priorities like Medicare for all right now or whatever else, because we have to spend our time making sure we don't descend into autocracy. And look, thank God the Democrats are united enough that we were able to pass legislation like the American Rescue Plan, and that we'll probably be able to pass the American Jobs Plan, but we would be kidding ourselves if we didn't acknowledge that H.R. 1 is the whole ballgame. Like, it'd be great if we could just worry about making the country better instead of having to save it from getting a lot worse, but that's the position that we're in. So look, yes, it's shitty, but we know it has to be done, and we have to keep pushing to make it happen. We need changes to the filibuster to eliminate that 60-vote threshold. We need the For the People Act passed, and we need to insulate it from a hostile conservative court. And part of that fight is educating people on why it's important so that when it is time to finally act, we're aware of what's at stake, and Republicans can't fill some knowledge vacuum with lies and misrepresentations. So keep spreading the word, because this will continue to be our top priority until it's passed. To listen to my interview with Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo, where we talk about the American Jobs Plan, how GOP opposition to that bill will hurt their constituents most, and how to push back against China, check out the interviews playlist on my YouTube channel.